Oh, good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's a kind of a little bit anticipatory Friday night in Los Angeles tonight. And I think that we have a kind of a global reach tonight. Hi, Anu in India. In the event, this is an intriguing time of year. It's atmospheric. Those of us who live in the temperate zones have a very distinctive path, from summer to winter and fall. Autumn is a very distinct month, a little bit like daybreak or sunset, and it's anticipating winter through colder weather coming and darker nights earlier. And out of all of this comes adrenaline. So the people, and there's a lot of land in the North Temperate Zone, Europe and North America, Asia. And these people feel a little quickening in their step, and they pull their coats around them a little bit. They go back to school, the birds fly south. And there is a real anticipation, I think, in the temperament of people that live in these zones, which is quite similar, if you want to have an analogy, to the anticipation we have to becoming part of the environment of God and one with God. That is to say, recognizing it. So the metaphor of climbing a mountain or going on a journey, as Swami Abhedananda said in his wonderful lecture, Journey to the Infinite, a while back, there is all of that in the action-oriented mind and temperament of many people that live in the temperate zones. And in the spirit of that, we've been, for many a day now, spending these Friday evenings with our Swami Abhedananda, who was one of the 16 disciples. We like to remind ourselves of Sri Ramakrishna, 5 of whom came to America. And he stayed for so long, for 20, 25 years. So to us now, Abhedananda, particularly since we've gone into these volumes of his in our Living Wisdom readings on Friday night of the 16 disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, he's become an uncle. It's a very interesting thing how people adopt each other. It's really what we need to do. We need to absorb the other person, to assimilate the vibes, the atmosphere, the temperament, the affirmations that that person represents. And once we've done that, to whatever degree of identity we can achieve by realizing that person too is Brahman. That's the way we overcome the grievous distinctions, separations that the ego, the first begotten of ignorance, brings to the human species. And that identity is called love. And that identity says, brother, sister. It also has said other things in times past that show amalgamation, affiliation. I happen to love the French term citizen, citoyen, comrade, fellow journeyman along the spiritual path of life. So now we're coming, frankly, into the great culmination, like the crescendo, anticipating the finale of a symphony, of Volume 6 of the works of Swami Abhedananda. And I would like to take tonight to kind of review a little bit, because this next to the last chapter is called Steps Toward Realization, and we will have a chance to review the marvelous path that he has led us along. And he has a gift of gab in his writing that seems to me to be a part of, akin to, in some sense, Vivekananda's incredible eloquence. Must have been most powerful in speaking as well as writing. So I'd like to just start in right away. He was talking, we might remember those of us who were here some of these Friday evenings, that he's been talking actually about the steps toward realization. And he was saying self-control is the first thing. Then comes the practice of truthfulness, because the eternal truth, capital T, the truth with a capital T that Jesus said, you shall know, and the truth shall make you free. And then, truth being the second thing, disinterested love for humanity is another, unselfish work the next. And then he says that non-attachment, well, these were subheadings. No, that's the second thing. Right discrimination is the third step in the path of realization, because he has some subsets here. Discrimination between spirit and matter. That's one of those lines, turn out the lights and it'll glow in the dark. This is something that India has to bring to us. And we'll review that from the Western steps. You see, he talks our language. This man came and studied himself, the things that interested us at the time, and all of that. And he's saying discrimination between spirit and matter, between the eternal and non-eternal. And that's their criterion of substance or of reality. Anything that's evanescent, what can it be but the floating leaves in the wind, which just settle down as soon as the wind goes through, or the clouds fleeting across the sky. He said discrimination between spirit and matter, between the eternal and non-eternal, because that is the discrimination between the real and the unreal. And that, he says, it is an essential thing in the path of divine realization with a capital D. Now the distinction, the intellectual factor level of the mind. First we gather in the senses. And then we have the interpretive, analytical, discriminative faculty of the mind coming to discern among these sense impressions, which are now in our TV set as the set warms up. So, oh yeah, I saw that picture last week. I know what that is. It's a chair or a bus coming. And he says, he says that this discrimination between the real and unreal is an essential thing in the path of divine realization. Now everything's mixed up as we mistake the real for the unreal, spirit for matter, and matter for the spirit, which is a big problema. I told you about my friend who had 2 dogs. And they were beauties. They were, I don't know, Malamutes or something. And he named them after goddess and god. And I fear he has to have his own evaluation in life, we have to come to that, made a mistake. He thought his dogs were God. And when they died, shouldn't do this, but it's fun. He missed them more, agonized, than he did when his wife and he parted ways. God was his dogs. His dogs were not God. So it's a whole lot more of a problema to mistake, as he says there, to mistake matter for spirit. Even mistaking spirit for matter is a problem. But if we try to see the infinite, shining, loving, wonderful spirit, which is what we call upon when we utter such a prayer as our founding Swami Abhedananda had us say, one of the first prayers, "O Lord, I want to love thee and thee only," because that's all there is. That is the only. "O Lord, I want to love thee and thee only. Please help me." So to try to see God in everything, 9/10, and reality, maybe 1/10, when it's all reality. They have a wonderful way. One of the great, great metaphors of the whole Vedanta experience is, and I've sort of seen this type of situation at twilight. You're walking along, and some distance, not far, your mind's on something else. You see something coiled up at your feet, and immediately before you see that 10,000th of a second or 1,000 or 100th of a second, before the intelligent will kicks in, oh, it's a snake. Your heart pounds, you feel the fear, and then you look more closely at twilight, underneath a tree, you see it's a rope, and you laugh. And that snake, they say, that we think of as 9/10 of our experience is appearance. And the reality is 100% underlying it. So it will also enable us, right discrimination, to see how far extends the realm of matter and where is the realm of the spirit. Kind of fun, because they can't both exist. There's only the reality, but we see the appearance. So the appearance is a state of experience. There's just no doubt about that, and then we're going to have some fun with that. So right discrimination will clarify the entire position and will give us right knowledge of everything in the universe, well, knowledge of a sort. So non-attachment, in other words, if the appearance is just a shadow and evanescent, it will disappear with a blink of an eye. I love the German expression, Augenblick, ja. Boop, it's gone. Then, you see, it says that non-attachment is the fourth step. Yeah, they say, those people over there, they think they're such big shots. But it's the scriptures from Deuteronomy that Jesus incorporated. He, about 5/7, 5/8 of his talks as a rabbi, itinerant rabbi, were from the Jewish Bible. Where else would he go? Yeah, thou shalt love the Lord thy God, all thy heart and mind and soul and strength. 4 yogas, and thy neighbor is thyself. Why? Because thy neighbor is identical through being Brahman also with one's own capital S self. Lots of fun. So our fourth step, everything that does not belong to us must not affect us. Well, we could go on for a long time with this. You know, what does belong to us? Nothing. In that sense, belong, meaning one with us. Not the body, not the mind. If matter is not our being, it ought not to affect us. This is the path of wisdom. This is why these wonderful Swamis from India seem to be pretty imperturbable. A lot of English words for that. I don't know, you know. They name all their destroyers these wonderful names, indomitable and all that. The Swamis are very even-keeled. And that's because they're always trying in very delightfully different ways. Each of the Swamis has his own journey and his own path to think of God all the time, to keep his mind on God all the time. Yes, and if we get, for the time being, needing to talk about the waking state, the dreaming state, or the dreamless state, sleep state, say the waking state, just for the practical things, to get back to God as soon as we can, as near to 100% as we can. That's the essence of it. If senses are not parts of our true being, they must not produce any change in us. Oh, I thought it was a snake. Huh. They don't have that experience. And the closer they are to God, the less they do. Now remember, this man had experienced nirvikalpa samadhi, as we believe all 16 of the disciples had. We believe that all of Jesus' disciples, Jesus being the Son of God, and by his own asseveration, as they say, his own assertion, said, I and my Father are one. So we believe that all of them were very special. If we are parts of divinity, the capital D, and are unborn children of the immortal bliss, why should we allow ourselves to be dragged on the sense plane by these limitations and little attractions? My friends, you just got your PhD. Why did this professor of Greek that just happened to meet Swami Vivekananda when he ran to Boston because the cost of living was too high in Chicago and he didn't have his credentials anyway to the Parliament of Religions, this naive kid from India? Greek professor starts writing this letter out to the committee in Chicago, asking this man for his credentials. It's like asking the sun its credentials to shine, asking for its credentials to shine. And it's a phrase that tickles me for football reasons. One of the greatest things Swamiji ever said. I mean, the church ever said about Swamiji. He said, this man is more learned, has more wisdom than all our Harvard professors put together. So, you just got your PhD. If we are parts of the divinity, nay, more than that, since there can only be one infinity shining, and are, as it were, in quotes, unborn children of the immortal bliss. Man, does this man know how to write. Why should we allow ourselves to be dragged on and on the sense plane by these limitations and little attractions, which ultimately, no more than the dream and the dream state, do not exist? Be godly. Wow. That's one of those zingers. I think the greatest chapter, the sentence, whatever, that Aldous Huxley ever wrote, and he was here, I heard him speak one time, one of the three Englishmen that were godsends that came to the founding Swami Abhedananda here. It's the greatest sentence he ever wrote. It was, God is. Jackie Bridgman collected Aldous Huxley's spiritual writings, for which I think he will be remembered, as is the case with the other two Englishmen that came. And I forget what she called it in English. Pretty good title. But the Germans, yeah, with their profundity, the big chest, the resounding Bell, the big bells in the cathedral of the church. I know what I'm talking about. I heard Paul Tillich. I heard him in Connecticut. I heard him in a cathedral-like setting in Chicago. Swamiji was responsible for that cathedral indirectly. Directly, he's told John D. Rockefeller, you got to start giving your money away. His son built, John D. and these all built the University of Chicago and the Divinity School, which I went to for a while, and also, you know, the cathedral there, whatever you call it, with the bells. So the Germans, in the translation, yeah, of the book by Aldous Huxley, yeah. All the spiritual writings, they called it, you know what they called it? They called it God is. Gott ist. And Jackie said, oh, I wish I had had that title. So, another one of these zingers, worth the whole book. Be godly. What a wonderful challenge for a lifetime. You got your PhD. God is never attracted by these little sense desires. Then why we, the children of God, should be attracted by these? We must be worthy of our Heavenly Father, H.F. They say, don't they say somewhere I heard it, that we're created in the image of God? Some people think that God has created an image of man. Well, that's another interesting thing. But the truth of it is, we are created in the image, the very substance, the essence of God, because there is nothing else. Whoa. And this is what you call the peroration. This is not the last chapter, folks. This is the next to the last chapter. And hang in there, because we're going to get to it someday. The last one is divine realization in big, black, bold type capital letters. We must not allow ourselves to be overcome by these attractions. This is a really good zinger as a ruler by which to lead one's life. In India, they divide life up in 4 quadrants. There's the first stage of life, say 25 years, I mean, if you want to be, you know, and that's the student phase. And then if you're a householder, it's a householder phase. And then if you're a householder, the vanaprastha stage, 3rd stage of life. We call it retirement. But the Indians don't retire. They don't get fidgety. You know, some people can't stand this lock up, lock down, lock in, whatever, lock out of the pandemic coronavirus. We're living heaven on earth up here. Well, they're dancing in the streets. That's my definition of heaven on earth. What's yours? But no, we are, because, you know, we have more time to try to do the things the Swamis want us to do, to make sure the place is worthy of worship, the grounds, to read, yes, every day, at least a page, not just by anybody, not even Tom Sawyer, by an illumined soul, who at least in the moments of her illumination, his illumination, was writing scripture, as if the hand of God was holding the pen. And oh yes, the 4 yogas, meditation. My friends, it's just as simple as this. From the point of view of the Western mind, and I mean Americans, all of us Americans, meditation is the essential ground. And the other yogas are like, it's a handle, and the others are like forks and spoons. And it's the essential ground to finding God within, and that's why they call it Raja Yoga, the royal path. And one of our boys is about to go to the contemplative monastery in Trabuco, 60 miles south of here. Do not, my friends, cry for him. Argentina. Oh yeah, there's an Argentinian Swami down there. I tell this fellow, I told him today on the phone, I said, look, I got two favorite Argentinians right now. One of them, St. Francis II. They call him Holy Father. Francis II. And then there's you. Yogananda, whatever it is. This man happens to be meditatively inclined. Well, so much for him. La-di-da. We ought to have one. So he can inspire us. Don't you see? So I really think he's going to sink in down there. And some other day we'll go into that. But I told him about some of those Swamis down there. We must never look down on another person's environment, another person's sociology, another person's temperament, personality, the gifts they have, because God has given us every one some kind of a gift. It's called our potentiality. And that's why it's a crying shame. It's a crying shame. If any group in any country, and they all try to do it, you know, seek to deny, let's just put in the old-fashioned term, from a man and his family. From a family of man, a member of the family of man, the path to her and his and the little baby's potentiality. To stand in the way of the fulfillment of that through education and jobs and dignity and whatever it takes. Especially when the people involved, the oppressed peoples of the world, have you noticed? They got two things going for them. And I'm talking about deep. They got dignity, which as far as I'm concerned equals liberty. You know, Daniel Boone had a very low standard of living. He's out there with a pocket knife in the jungle, in the woods. Compared even to New York City, he had a low standard of dignity. I'm sorry, of living. But he had dignity. God granted it him, and he accepted it as an independent soul. And in that dignity, don't you see, he had liberty, which I think is the greatest gift that one human being can, if you will, give another by standing out of the way. Just stand out of the way. By all means, help, if you can, to provide the way that they can make the path clear for themselves. Everybody knows. That's what Swamiji said about the women, you know. They kept coming up to Swamiji at a very kind of revolutionary time in England had come along, freedom of this, and people were really upset, getting upset, including a couple of Indians, very famous people, about child marriage and all this stuff. And somebody come over to Swami and said, what are you going to do about this situation? What are you going to do about that situation for the women? And he looked him right in the eye. You know, this guy's something else. It's not easy to be around saints. He said, what are you asking me for? Why do you come to me with those questions? Go to the women. Men's job is to clear out the underbrush, to clear out the obstructions that they often have placed. And that's all. That's the job. Audrey Kitagawa, one of the most wonderful people on the face of the earth today, as far as I'm concerned, that's what I know. And, you know, talking about the women's millennium, and you got 5 women leaders to start with. As I got her, and I got Abhedananda Swami, and all of it. 3 others, you name your list, I got mine. At the end of the Parliament of Religions. Now, I want you to take this to heart, because it's huge. It's not just a thought, it's an action. Like they do in the Olympics, you know, they're going to hand to the mayor of the next city 4 years from now, and the last one hands on whatever it is, a torch or whatever. So they're going to do that for her because she's going to be like the chairman of the board and the executive director of Action. She gets up there with these two huge screens, thousands of people in chairs the last day or whatever. She smiles. She accepts the accolades. And she goes on talking about women. So the men at this point are kind of slouching, some of them, in their chairs and picking the lid off. Well, not quite, but they're, their minds are beginning to wander. And then all of a sudden she says, and the men. And all of a sudden these guys wake up, and sit on the edge of their chairs, hard enough to get their attention engaged anyway. And there they are, anticipatory. They have a role to play too. She said, hold open the door, we're coming through. All right. Liberty and dignity go together. So he said, we must be worthy of our Heavenly Father in whose image we are created. We must not allow ourselves to be overcome by these attractions. This is the job for Vanaprastha. If you're a householder and all this stuff, not that it isn't from babyhood. I'm not saying that. But this is the time, the third quarter of life, as it were, that everybody got to start looking for the real instead of the appearance. Because it's the real, as it says in our scriptures, that will not pass away. I think this is hot diggity dog. Attachment to earthly things cannot exist in the soul which has reached this step in the path of realization. Now, I admit we had a subset for these 5 things, and we kind of got them a little bit melded up here, but that's all right. Then comes the 5th step, and the whole chapter is called Steps Towards Realization. We've really been climbing a staircase, and this is right up to the last step to the roof. You better know what they're talking about. It says, then comes the 5th step, the step of spiritual enlightenment. In this state, the light of the divine, capital D, sun, begins to shine in the soul. We then understand that we are not of this world. This world is not our home. Please forgive me. You understand you're dealing with the bottom of the deck. You got a simple country boy who somehow found himself sprawled out, spangled, a first-generation immigrant boy in New York City from Southern Illinois, man. Hey. We knew Lincoln, He didn't come from Illinois. He didn't go to Illinois until he was a grown man. He went from Kentucky to Indiana. I know I shouldn't, but I'm just so simple. It's provincial. Hopefully it's not, as they say, parochial. My cousin married his sister. My grandmother's brother, Reuben, he'd been stolen by the Indians. And there was some kind of treaty made. And all the little children that had been taken by the Indians were supposed to be given back. So he comes floating down the Ohio River, Uncle Reuben, on a log. He's about 9 years old now with an iron pot on his head. And the Illinois story was very brief. All we knew was that this had happened, and they put him on a bed. He got down off the bed and slept on the floor. He always walked around with a hat with a feather in it. He got up in the morning to greet the rising sun. And they didn't know what he was doing. He was worshiping in the Indian fashion. They thought he was jumping up and down on a log like a chicken. So Uncle Reuben comes down in Indiana one time into a clearing, finds a man down there, and kind of wandering around loose, and he says, he says, this young man says, I'm thinking of bringing my family over from Kentucky. And Uncle Reuben said, well, when you do, I'll give you a job. The man fiddle-faddled around, fishtuckled, we say in New York, fishtuckled. Procrastinated. Anyway, he got there late. I think it was September at least. So all the time he had was to make a lean-to, a log cabin with 3 sides and a deer flap for the front. And he put his wife and 2 little children in there. His name was Tom. And his wife, as I do recollect, was named Nancy. And the children were called Sarah and Abe. And so Abe Lincoln grew up with these Grigsby boys, with Uncle Reuben's children. They had a whole bunch of panoply there, good stories. And the oldest brother, who brought Lincoln's first law book to him from Bloomington, Indiana, down there, just on the Ohio River project. He married Sarah Lincoln. All I'm trying to say is that, to me, it's got to be experiential, or it really just don't matter and don't amount to a hill of beans. That's why these frontier religions, you see, all these denominations, they have their moment in the sun, and sometimes the sun keeps shining on. Sure it does. For 2,000 years, it's been shining on the Catholic Church. Some 2,000 years. But they get some mystic here and a mystic there, a mystic here, a mystic, and there's a shower of spirituality inside, and they feel it in their hearts, and then you get a new denomination. The Baptists got 400 of them. They do. 3 seasons of spirit, predestinarian Baptist, primitive Baptist, missionary Baptist, foot washing Baptist. And they kind of split off fairly amicably, actually. But it means that somebody felt inside her heart a yearning, a call. Maybe. Is there anyone there? Is there anyone out there? And here's a resounding yes. Then comes the 5th step, the step of spiritual enlightenment. In this state, the light of the divine sun begins to shine in the soul. We then understand that we're not of this world. This world is not our home. And I'm sorry, but that's just what you got tonight. Sometimes I kind of like to be the fool of God. That's why I try to crack jokes. I don't think that's too much to yearn for, do you? So my grandfather, I love the dude. Dad's dad, farmer. Mother's closest friend. We couldn't think of that, but she called him a spiritual aristocrat. Well, and he would sing a song. I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger. You've heard me sing it before. A-traveling through this world of woe. And there's no toil, no pain, no danger in that fair land to which I go. Don't tell me the people don't know nothing. The people, what we call the real people, are the people of spirit. And I will never sell this country short, and I'll never sell them, as we used to say, in Illinois, down the river. Do you remember why Jim and Huck Finn were so eager to catch the land? They were from Missouri, in the raft of Illinois, that southern point where we lived. Because if they missed their chance to make the land in there, hang on tight. Wasn't going to be too good for Jim. We've got to make the landing. We got to hang on tight. at least in the vanaprastha, third stage of life. How about now? Even if you're just a mewling little baby. We're all little babies. Swami used to say, remember, you got no excuse. You used to love as babies. Earthly relations belong to the earth, but we are essentially rooted in the world of the Supreme Spirit, capital S. We are above and beyond this earth. This body is only a physical shell, like a seashell people. You know about the hermit crab? The hermit crab. I mean, the delightful modification, delineation of life. He walks around in somebody else's home. This critter, whatever it is, hasn't used it for years, long gone. And this empty seashell lying around on the seafloor. So the hermit crab gets inside, and walks around on somebody else's shell. That's what the body is. Yeah. Or a gross garment of the soul. Well, we've really been walking the walk. We've been walking the walk. This really doesn't mean anything, and I should be forgiven because I know better. But do you remember the story of the little crab? And he fell in love with an oyster. So the oyster decided that what she should do is, at some point, have him meet her folks. So she lined up this huge thing, dinner party and all, and she said, now look, she said, when you go up to meet Daddy and Mom, just don't walk sideways. So when the time comes, the receiving line or whatever, here comes her beau, her fiance, and he walks straight as an arrow up to her dad like that, And she said, she said later, I was so happy with you. You just walked straight as an arrow. How come you did that? He said, I'm so drunk I can't walk sideways. All right. Now then, we shall be able to throw it, the gross garment. And for some of us, it's getting to be kind of threadbare, kind of a worn out, and rise above it by our willpower. That means the intellectual will has a place in all this. The mind has a place to overthrow the delusion of the dream. That's the fascinating thing. Then we shall know that the soul existed long before this body was born. And as we read before, then we shall be able to say, before Abraham was, I am. This is the expression of the eternal truth, capital T, not of one individual soul alone, but of all. And when we're able to do that, we know that death cannot attack us and birth cannot touch us. We are free from birth and death. The next step, the last one, I guess, is spiritual illumination. This is the sixth stage in our progress to realization. Now, I would just want to have a little fun for a moment or two while we're at it, because we have had quite a time with Swami Abhedananda. And by way of review, the Western mind, which we have all become somewhat inculcated with, talks about that. It has a capital E in it. So that's what the physicists are getting more spiritual every day. They the beauty is now with the physicists. And the mysticism is with the physicists, not the theologians. So much. Maybe a rare one here or there. So it's all about E. Everything that we see out there that we think of as the world is matter, right? Fine particle. I mean, we think of it as matter like that. But these are fine particles, if you will, protons and electrons and things like that, the table fine particle of matter, but they're not matter. They're all energy. And so Einstein comes up with this, which says that matter is energy. And incidentally, the C, you might think that would be the capital C, because 186,000 miles a second. That's just a bookkeeping entry to get the units the same, so you can talk about energy units. A lot of energy when you release it from your impression that it was matter. Matter is congealed energy, like an iceberg. And Einstein famously referred to that equation in which mass, we could say in parentheses matter, dropped out as a principle of physics in 1905. So now the beautiful thing is that we have been dealing with in Western American English terminology is that Whitehead comes along, the great summation of Western philosophy, who he said of Western philosophy that all Western philosophy is a footnote to Plato, who's the spiritual son of the illumined Socrates. I love to reinforce these things in my mind by reminding myself, as we said last week, Emerson said Saint Socrates. So Whitehead said energies, which is incidentally feminine in most languages. The Spirit, Holy Spirit, is feminine in the Hebrew scriptures. And in India it's called Shakti. And this is not only Mother, the God immanent, the Mother of light, the Mother of the universe. This is the universe, huh? It's energy. And Whitehead said, energy, seen from inside, is experience. There's a man named Paul Weiss, who was the man that they thought was perhaps the great metaphysician of Whitehead's students. I was influenced by four of them. He's the one that taught me in his simple words, everything is something on the inside. He said everything's something on the outside, something on the inside, something from the inside, and something from the outside. Now, I'm not sure that everything is something on the outside, but there it is. A tree is something on the inside. It's got a personality. It's got energy. It's got sensation. It's got feelings. A plant has feelings. Most discovered that minerals do too. Whitehead really said this about everything, but it's been distilled into this lovely expression: an electron is a drop of experience. So we've been talking about the various states. We started with our boy talking about two psychologists and stuff, 1920, around then, about the relative status of matter, in quotes, and energy and in the world of physics and even psychology in 1920. And he helped us to realize that Westerners have turned their minds, the psychologists, to three states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and dreaming sleep. That's what we did in the early days with what we called the mind, which collects senses, experiences, and then India realizes that really it's a separate, more inward, finer, and more powerful, because before you build any big building, you have to have a blueprint. Everything came out of somebody's mind first, so mind does precede matter. Thought, experience does precede action, which is merely an external manifestation in the string of cause and effect. So waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep, and all three the Western psychologists have turned their attention to. And our friend Abhedananda started telling us, hey, there's another level of experience coming from the Atman, coming from Brahman, coming from God, which is infinity experience, shining consciousness, bringing its light, its rays down to the seeming emanations in Maya of matter, of a world of appearance, of which, as they Vedantas say, the firstborn is ignorance, of ego, separation. And so Adam sees the tree. And there was more than one tree in the garden, but one of them was called the tree of knowledge. And however that all come down in the myth and all, Adam wanted to eat that fruit. Very possibly, I don't really say that, but anyway, he figured out a way to do it. And at that moment, he and she achieved their human status. I think if you want to talk about anthropology, it's when we were asked to stand up on our hind legs, sometime around in there. And the cerebral cortex brought cortical delay, time delay. You can go home at night in the cave and play a TV show rerun of the mind of what happened in the day. And with that came this misguided notion that we're separate from God, and God comes and taps Adam on the shoulder one day. Said, Eve, I'd kind of like you to hear this too. It's time for you kids to leave the nest, where you were held in the hand of the laws of nature, the hand of God. And I see, as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as a bad animal. Well, there are animals who've been trained by humans to be vicious. That's a problem. Even genetically trained. We think that Dobermans maybe have that thing built into them. Aggressive behavior can train sweet behavior in animals too. They're doing it. Nevertheless, when they stood on their hind legs, which they thought was the image of God, it's really spirit, said it's time for you all to go out on your own for a while. So it was inevitable that Adam and Eve would eat of the tree of knowledge if they're going to become human. And the whole thing is to get back to God. Don't you see, in that marvelous circle? So the body and the mind and the two phases of the early way of looking at consciousness, the first one, the gathering of the senses, and then the analysis, the differentiation, oh yeah, and calling it by name and saying this is something and so on. These things came along. So it's ironic that the way to get back is to get beyond body and mind. But that very intelligent will, that very intellectual discriminating faculty of the mind is part of the game and part of the secret of getting beyond by establishing self-control. And yes, the Iranians, you know, sometimes your best friends will be the people that tell you what you don't want to hear. And it may be very painful. And you may think they're my enemy. But I don't think we should just totally dismiss it when the Iranians, as much as they have to be accountable for with terrorism and this, that, and whatever, and that, and authoritarianism under the name of religion again, my Lord, haven't we done that? Didn't I see that show hundreds of years ago, Theology and Authoritarianism? They got a lot to answer for. But when they call us misguided, we might just want to take a little stop and listen and think within ourselves. And we don't need to knock anybody out of the ball game because they lived 300 or 400 years ago. Yes, they may have done some bad things, but they may have had some real illuminations, wisdom. And Tommy Jefferson, he's one of them. All people, eh? It had to come to that because they wrote it in stone. That's what the problem of the Westerners is. The Romans, they incise their great sayings into the stone. Julius Caesar, they dig it into the white stone. All people are created equal. That's what they mean by in order to form a more perfect union. Now we got trees, we got plants, we're trying to see the rights of animals. But the truth of the matter is that God, they said, nature's God, the God of nature, God gave us certain inalienable rights. Nobody talked like that under George III. Really. And among these are life. Life. You could spend a whole day on that one, meditating. Liberty. The whole history of the human race could be summed under that one word. Down the bullet. And the pursuit of happiness. Now, I think we have some symbols, embodiments of the misbegotten, the misguided, the misgotten pursuit of happiness in the wrong direction, and one is greed, and the other, believe it or not, is Disneyland. The prince and the princess, and they lived happily ever after, if by that you merely mean the blandishments of the external form, which isn't even love. And you cannot pin it on people of one persuasion, say conservatives, because the life plan of one of our major liberals, I won't mention his name just now, is identical to that of the major exponent in the last some years of this other point of view from the conservatives. Sure, I'm going to get all the money in the world, not just some, not just a lot. I'm going to get every dollar, including yours and yours, because I'm seeking infinity. The billionaire waking up in the morning, getting out of bed, putting his feet on, what does he want? He wants another dollar. Okay, he has to have it because it's infinity, and he'll never get it that way. As a matter of fact, it'll lead him to distraction. And I mean distraction. So both one of the leading liberal exponents and the leading, yeah, they got pretty much the same. One believes in drugs, make them all legal. And this, that, and the other. But Sri Ramakrishna said, hey, the two problems, he didn't quite put it this way, but I do. You got the problem of the rich and the problem of the poor. And they're not mutually exclusive. The problem of the rich is greed. Assimilation, belly. See, the essence of greed is overeating. That's what it is, assimilating everything inside oneself. But you can't do it because it's not infinity. Just a bunch of finite things will never add up to infinity. And others having too many babies. And this is not the sin or the difficulty of the poor, but it's the crisis of the poor. It's the incubus that we have on our back that is driving us down. It's the number 1, 2, and 3 problem of the world, I like to say, overpopulation, and leads to environmental sustainability and hunger and war and disease and poverty. People who can't get an ounce of education, though you don't have to read to be educated, but that are so ignorant, stubbornly ignorant, that they'll follow any fool, any medicine seller at the carnival, and believe that what he's telling them is true when it's nothing but a darn pack of lies. Iran. The United States, through the blessing of India and the Eastern culture and civilization, is bringing us saving grace. Saving grace, I love that sound that saved a soul like me. I once was lost, the outer world, even the inner world, but now am found. I'm on the path to God's eternity and liberty. Yes, and life. Jesus said, I've come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. And yes, my friends, the pursuit of joy, the pursuit of love, the pursuit of happiness.